Welcome to You Brew Kombucha. Today I'm going to share some tips on what you should do if you're afraid of your kombucha bottles exploding. So this is a really common fear with a lot of kombucha homebrewers. I think there's been a lot of, honestly, fear-mongering within the kombucha community about bottles exploding. And my main recommendation to help alleviate a lot of those stresses and concerns about exploding bottles is just to make sure that you use really good quality pressure-rated bottles to begin with. So I have been testing and brewing hundreds and hundreds of batches of kombucha over the last few years, and I have not once ever had a bottle explode on me, except during a very controlled experiment where I knew that it was possible and honestly likely that one of those bottles would explode. I was basically testing out reused, recycled beer bottles that I got from the store, and I wanted to see if they were as pressure rated as a kombucha brewing process needed them to be. And the answer was no. One of them exploded, but it was in a very controlled environment. And I'm going to share with you some of those tips on how to basically give yourself a controlled environment if you don't trust the bottles that you're using to ferment your kombucha, or if you're just afraid that one of them might explode and it might be a safety hazard. First tip, get really good quality pressure-rated food-safe bottles, and I have a whole other video dedicated to choosing quality bottles and caps for kombucha brewing, so definitely check that video out because I share all of the tips and details around where I get my bottles, the types of bottles you should look out for, the types of bottles you should avoid for kombucha brewing. Knowing that this is a naturally carbonating, naturally fermenting product, you want to make sure that you have glass that's thick enough to actually withstand the naturally building carbonation and pressure that builds up over the course of the fermentation cycle in kombucha. So step one, get really good bottles, really good caps. Step two, if you've done that and you're still afraid, or if you're testing out some bottles that you're reusing or recycling, then what you could do to help alleviate some of that stress is when you're fermenting it at room temperature, just have a designated cabinet where you keep your bottled flavored kombucha. So I actually have a fermentation cabinet that I use just for my kombucha brews, and it is lined with a cardboard, with just a piece of cardboard where I keep my kombucha bottles, and you could line it with a towel if you think that'll help minimize the mess. But what I like about keeping it in a closed, contained cabinet is that if, for whatever reason, one of the bottles gets overcarbonated and overpressurized and it explodes, it's not just sitting out on your countertop where family members might be in the vicinity of the glass breaking or the bottle exploding. So a closed cabinet is a really good way to just help alleviate that stress. Another way to do that is, if you don't want to dedicate a cabinet or any sort of closed container in your kitchen to your bottles, is to, if you have a cooler or any sort of container that has reinforced walls that are really thick enough to withstand the impact of something breaking. So I like to use a cooler. This is just a regular old cooler. You can just keep your bottles in there. Again, you can just keep a towel in there if you are worried about leaking or spilling, but that's another way to just make sure that the bottles aren't exposed to anyone who might come across them if they happen to explode. There are also people who are concerned about the bottle exploding when it's in your hand and you're about to drink the bottle of kombucha. So my recommendation before opening any bottle of kombucha is to make sure that it's thoroughly chilled. So warm temperatures or room temperatures greatly exaggerate carbonation. So if you open a bottle of kombucha that's at room temperature, while the bottle may not necessarily explode, the liquid contained in that bottle will likely fizzy out, make a mess. It's more likely to have a liquid explosion out of the bottle because the carbonation is exaggerated at room temperature. Take that same bottle of kombucha and put it in the fridge, and then open it after it's been thoroughly chilled, and I guarantee you that the carbonation and the level of fizziness is going to stay in the liquid as opposed to fizzying out and making a mess all over the place. So to help prevent overcarbonated issues with either making a mess or glass breaking, always be sure to chill your bottles. So as soon as you're done with the second fermentation phase and you think that you're at the perfect level of carbonation, go ahead and put all of your bottles in the refrigerator, chill them, and only open them once they're chilled. If you're still worried about the glass breaking in your hand, just go ahead and take a thick towel and just use that to basically shield your hand from the glass as you're opening the bottle. And what you can then do is take this rubber gripper. I love these really basic rubber grippers. I'll add a link to them in the description box below. They're also part of my recommended brewing materials list on my website. But I love these because it allows you to both get a really great seal when you're sealing the bottles to ensure good carbonation gets trapped in the liquid, but it's also fantastic for opening the really tight bottles and making sure that, one, if the liquid starts fizzying out all over the place, that it doesn't explode out onto the ceiling or onto your face. It'll keep it contained in the towel. And two, if the cap happens to break, that's never happened to me, but if the cap on your bottle or any part of the glass happens to break, that it's all kind of being kept contained underneath this little umbrella of the gripper. So this is how I would open a bottle that I'm afraid of cracking. And there's a lot of carbonation in this one. That's how I would just open the bottle if I was concerned of any glass breaking. And that's also a good way to, even if you're not concerned about glass breaking, but you're just concerned about like the liquid fizzying out all over the place and making a mess, that's also another great way to help preserve that liquid. Basically, if you want to open a bottle of kombucha that you think is overcarbonated or think might explode, then you can use this rubber gripper to basically open it. And if you have a glass or a bowl, you can just open it over that glass or bowl and preserve the liquids and so that none of it has to go to waste. So if you're curious about whether or not it makes sense to burp your kombucha bottles and what my perspective on that is, definitely check out my video on burping kombucha bottles because I share a lot more details there. I'll definitely link that video down in the description box below, so check that out if you're curious. And then if you have any other questions or if you're curious about other aspects of the kombucha brewing process, definitely check out the other videos on my channel. I also share links to my favorite materials and to my book. And so with that, happy brewing!